Hello and welcome to the Uplifting Relationships podcast. I am just so happy that you are here and that you are joining me. As a reminder, our approach is three prongs. I'm not just coming here with my opinions or what I think is good, even though I think I have a few good things to say, but we focus on the research and what has been proven to be helpful and effective. And then secondly, we focus on the practical, and lastly, the most transformative and powerful component and piece of this whole thing, which is the biblical. And so I wanted to hear from my community, on the Uplifting Relationships community on Facebook, and they were like, time after time, they were like, I want to focus on forgiveness. I want to focus on rebuilding trust. And so guess what? Today's podcast is all about that. And I'm going to talk about what is forgiveness, right? As a definition, like what does that mean? What does that look like? And then a few practical steps that you can take toward forgiving. Because one thing that I always say is that to preserve the best version of yourself, you have to forgive, and forgiveness preserves the best version of you. And that's what we all about here, right? We're trying to be the best versions of ourselves in our relationships. And honestly, you can have as much willpower as you want to, but that really requires, Christ, who is, perfect, who can really help you in that process. And so let's go ahead and dive on in, because I can stay right there for a minute. But I want to make sure that you're getting everything that you need from today's podcast. So before I go and define forgiveness, this is my absolute most favorite definition of forgiveness. I'm gonna hold it for a second, right? I'm gonna hold it for a second. I'm gonna set today's intention, right? Because here's the thing. Here's the reality, family, is that you only have two choices. Here's the thing. Everyone is imperfect. Like, there is no perfect person. And the reality is that someone in one of your most treasured relationships, whether it's a marriage, I don't know, they may disappoint you or you may disappoint them. It's the reality of being human. Right? And you're probably going to hear from him a lot. I talk all the time about Dr. John Gottman. And he talks about in his research and looking at happier couples versus unhappy couples. And what he finds is that the happier couples have an effective way of repairing. And family, if you do not have an effective way of repairing, you're not going to be able to maintain that relationship long term. And a very effective and helpful way to repair is through forgiveness. And so, you're getting this information for free and, you really definitely want to apply it to your relationships. But the reality, before I even go into the definition, is that you have one of two choices. There's literally no in between when it comes to forgiveness, right? It's either you choose to forgive or you choose to not forgive. And the reality is that when you delay that thing, right? What happens is you're delaying your healing. You're delaying you being able to show up as the best version of yourself. All right. And we don't want to prolong that, because the longer we stay stuck in unforgiveness, the longer that thing actually clings to us. And it starts to constrict us, and it starts to kind of morph in a negative way who we are, right? And we don't have time for that. So, you have just two choices. One, either you forgive or you don't forgive. And sometimes you may say, well, I'm waiting on things. I'm waiting for this person to show up the right way. I'm waiting for them to deserve my forgiveness. Here's the thing, is that how people say it is for you, like forgiveness, it is for you. And that definitely is the reality. Sometimes we even have to let go of the expectation that we have of the other person to show up perfectly because we've forgiven. Don't wait. Don't delay. Don't delay when it comes to forgiveness. So with those choices, there comes some outcomes, right? So when we choose to forgive, the outcome is healing, right? And we're all about healing over here. But when you don't, see, here's the thing. Unforgiveness is actually subconscious sometimes, and it's reactive. But forgiveness is proactive. And we want to take that proactive approach in our relationships, right? And also too, the residual effect of unforgiveness is essentially hatred and negative affect. And that is what it literally will depress your immune functioning. It will negatively impact your health. I don't know if you know, but the University of Tennessee, they have a forgiveness lab. And what's really interesting about it's a research lab. And what they have found is that for people who do not forgive, that negative emotion that they hold on to, it actually negatively impacts their health, making you more susceptible to pain, more likely to have a headache, more likely to even catch a cold. Right? We don't necessarily think about it, but it's all connected. Like our relational health is impacting our physical health as well. And it's really a bidirectional relationship sometimes too. So, forgiveness is actually an opportunity. And one thing about unforgiveness, I always say, is that it's actually bait for your own bad behavior. Come on now. A lot of times when we're thinking about like someone who has done something to us, a lot of times they have justification. They have a reason why, right? And a lot of times it's because maybe you didn't hurt them, but someone hurt them. Something from their past is impacting how they're showing up today, right? And, you don't want to sit with that for too long because it changes you. Whatever decision you decide, whether it's to forgive or not to forgive, it's going to change you, right? And, the reality is that we are not static. We are not static. So who I am today, I'm going to change 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But it's going to be based on my decisions. I'm not going to be able to control everything that happens to me, but I'm going to be able to control my response. All right. And forgiveness gives us that opportunity to be proactive, to expand, and to grow. It doesn't constrict us. Okay. Real question. Have you ever been around someone who you were like, they did you the wrong way, and you don't feel like you can be yourself? You feel a little constricted. You feel a little like you're walking on eggshells. We want that full, beautiful expression of you, right? That's what we want, okay? And so, also unforgiveness keeps us stuck in the pain of the past, and it perpetuates that cycle. It's like watching a movie that you hate over and over and over again. And the more that you watch that movie, the madder you get. Okay, I'm going to say something, right? So here's the thing. Have you ever heard that time heals all wounds? Have you ever heard that? If you listen to somebody else, ask them. We've all heard that, right? That time heals all wounds. That's a lie. Can I tell you that time does not heal all wounds? Because if you nurse that thing, if you nurse that wound and you put more dirt in that wound, come on now, what happens is it could potentially get infected. And it reminds me of this story, like, David's son, Absalom. So, story in the Bible, his sister got raped, right? His sister got raped by her half brother. You can go look it up if you need to. She got raped, right? Think about it. Anyone close to you, she didn't deserve that, right? She definitely didn't deserve that, right? And here's the thing, offenses can happen that are so unfair. But here's the thing about this situation. Time did not heal that wound. About a year after her getting raped, guess what Absalom did? He wasn't healed. He went and he murdered his own brother. So he must have been nursing that thing, getting angry and plotting and scheming. And essentially his unforgiveness turned him into someone else. So the reality is that you have to make this proactive choice, family, to actually pursue forgiveness. Because if we nurse those things, if we nurse those offenses, it can actually cause or encourage our own bad behavior. All right. And the reality is that that's not what we want. We want to be able to show up as our best self. So, but here's the thing. You got to take ownership and you have to work for your healing. Granted, you don't have to do it by yourself. You don't have to do it on your own. Like God is your help and helping your heart to heal. But you have to proactively choose to do this thing. And that's an example. So whenever you hear that time heals all wounds, think about Absalom. Think about this story I just told you. Or think about other stories, maybe even in your own life. You know, when we think about those old people who are just still kind of mean and, I don't know. Most of the old people I know, they were just like sweet as pie, would, just give you anything, cook a dinner for you, But you may know a couple old people who are like, well, goodness, why are they old and mean? You never know. It could have been something 20 years ago. It could have been something 30 years ago. There are some things that people haven't let go, and now they're walking around as a distorted version of themselves, and that's the person that you're experiencing. And I don't want that distorted version to be you, family. All right? Okay. So have I set the intention for today's podcast? Maybe so. So I want to share with you guys my absolute favorite definition of forgiveness. And this comes from UC Berkeley. So UC Berkeley, they have a magazine called The Greater Good. It's free out there if you want to take a look at it. They have beautiful, positively uplifting research, right? And this definition is so beautiful and it resonates with me because it gives a good definition of what forgiveness is. And then it also gives a wonderful definition for what forgiveness is not. And I think sometimes the reason why people are a little bit hesitant about rebuilding trust, about forgiveness, is because they have some myths in their minds about what forgiveness is not. Okay, so I'm going to get to that. You're going to really that's going to be good. So what is the definition of forgiveness based on this definition from UC Berkeley's magazine, The Greater Good? This is verbatim. Is that good? And I love how they start off with how forgiveness is a choice. I haven't gotten to the definition yet, but forgiveness is a mental, conscious, proactive choice that you make, family. And sometimes it takes time for your emotions to catch up because, yes, healing does take time. But time in and of itself, if you're not using the time proactively, if you're not proactively using that time, then time is not necessarily working for you. That's just like saying, just give it time and you'll be an expert in whatever your field is. No. Yes, time coupled with action, coupled with doing the things that will make you an expert in that field, then if you keep on doing those reps, you keep on doing your work, then time mixed with doing those reps, you'll see a positive result, right? And so I want you to be encouraged because you may have made that decision to forgive, but you may still, your emotions may not have caught up yet. That thing may still hurt. You may still be sad. You may still be feeling some of that. And that's all right. Give yourself a little bit of grace, family. All right. But so if I guess I'll go ahead and start with the definition here. So forgiveness, by definition from UC Berkeley, Greater Good, it is a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you. I could probably stop right there. And I believe it's in that releasing piece, that's where your healing comes from. Because it is that resentment, it's that desire to want to get even, for them to feel your same pain. That's what is really most harmful for your actual health, your emotional health, as well as your physical health. Okay. And here's the thing. This is the kicker in this definition. It says, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness. Here's the thing. the person who may have harmed you, whether it's your partner, whether it's your spouse, whether it's a friend, here's the thing, is that they may never fully come to comprehend the extent of your pain. Or in other cases, they may not even request your forgiveness. I may have to do a podcast episode on apology languages. If you want me to do an episode on apology languages, just let me know, because that's a good one. Okay, that's a book we've all heard of love languages. Gary Chapman also coined apology languages as well. You can also take that quiz online for free. Okay, that's a little practical one out there. I just gave that to you for free. So it's a wonderful resource. But, sometimes we're waiting for that person to be contrite. We're waiting for that person to be apologetic. We're waiting for that person to be remorseful. And here's the thing, family, your healing cannot be delayed due to how that other person is showing up. Because the longer you wait, the longer you're delaying your healing. And so here's another part of that definition that I love so much. It's so powerful. It says that forgiveness brings the forgiver peace of mind and frees him or her from corrosive anger. That anger piece, man, that's when it's most tempting to say or do something that could be super harmful. I tell my students all the time, if you don't know me, I'm also a psychology professor. I'm so grateful for that as well. But I can't be in there doing all this in school, right? So I get to let you know all sides of how I view things here on the podcast. But I always tell my students, like, this information, understanding how to have healthy relationships, is literally a matter of life and death. Case in point. Think about a lot of these murder, death, suicides that we see that involve like a domestic issue. Somebody's anger was uncontained. Somebody's anger got the best of them. People say they weren't thinking. They said and they did something once they came back to their senses. Because here's the reality. When you get really, really upset, the rational part of your brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, right? That's in control of rational thought, it literally checks out. And your brain is saying, something is dangerous here. Either I need to defend myself, or I need to freeze, or escape and run. And the reality is that when you're in that mode, you're not thinking clearly. So I always say that this information is it really is a matter of life and death. What if those people had the skills? There are people in jail today, family, because of something with their anger. And it was probably an offense or a past offense or maybe even a past childhood pain that they were trying to manage. So this stuff is important. It's super important. All right. So, but this is what I also love about this definition. It's not saying what happened to you didn't matter. Because I think sometimes when people are like, I want to forgive, does that mean that what they did didn't hurt me? Nope, not at all. That's why I love this definition so much. So another part of this definition, they say it empowers you to recognize the pain that you suffered. Ooh, this is so good. Without letting that pain define you. And I just told someone today, I was so grateful they're coming along in their restoration process in their relationship. And, I said, sometimes in a marriage, unfortunate, terrible things can happen. But I said that doesn't have to define the relationship, and it doesn't have to define the marriage, and that's a courageous step to be able to move forward and to forgive and to continue to move on, right? Such a courageous step. But here's this piece that really resonates with me as well. It says, it empowers you to recognize the pain you suffered without letting that pain define you. So it's like, yeah, it hurt. It's real. It was there. It happened, and it crushed me, right? It's not saying it didn't. It recognizes it, but it doesn't have to define you, nor does it have to define your marriage, nor does it have to define your relationship, and it doesn't have to define your future. Okay? That's a little extra. I put a little extra icing on that. But enabling you to heal and move forward with your life. So can you see why I like this definition so much? And that is such a beautiful definition. And you may say, "Oh, Cassandra, that was good." You can actually, it's Google. You can Google it. So it's out there. If you want to actually, go back and take a look at it for yourself, if it was really helpful. But here's another piece. They define what forgiveness is not. And I think this is so wonderful. It says, forgiveness is not necessarily glossing over what happened. So when you forgive, you do not gloss over or deny the seriousness of an offense against you. It's not saying, "Oh, that was okay." It's not saying that. It's saying it does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean condoning or excusing offenses. Alrighty? And in some cases, it talks about how forgiveness can help repair a damaged relationship. It definitely can. But in some cases, it may not necessarily obligate you to reconcile. But family, if you are married and you want to honor those vows, reconciliation is a part of your last name. Healing and forgiving and moving on is a part of your last name, essentially. Because, like I said before, and it could be a small offense. It doesn't have to be something huge. It doesn't have to be, they bought a whole house without you. It doesn't have to be something huge. It could be something small, but small things can add up, right? And if it matters to the other person and it may be small, then it should matter. But in our case, especially if you were married, then reconciliation is a must. We have to really reconcile. So what does reconciliation really mean by very definition? So I'm going to go to actually get you the definition of reconcile here. And it means to cause a person to accept or be resigned to something not desired. It means to win over to friendliness. Oh my gosh, I love that piece, to win over to friendliness. Because a lot of times when something has happened and you're in a state of unforgiveness, there's tension there. But to reconcile means to win back over to to friendliness, to become amicable again, to reconcile hostile persons, right? It means to compose or settle, like a quarrel. It means to, oh my gosh, this is a really good piece of that. It means to bring into agreement or harmony. Oh my gosh. With that piece, with the bringing into agreement and harmony, that's the only way you can move forward and be if you're in a relationship long term, you want there to be harmony. You don't want there to be discord. You don't want to feel like you're on two separate pages. And so that's also very powerful, and it means to restore. Oh, just love that. And it's a necessary element of a relationship. All right. So this is why I say, especially if you are a believer, here's the thing, is that you're imperfect too. And you've had to be forgiven, right? And so this is something that I think can really ground you and keep you encouraged in that process of reconciling. There's so much to share. And I actually have a 4-part series that I've done on this whole forgiveness piece. So I'm pretty sure that this podcast is probably going to have to be maybe about at least a 2-part podcast, at least, so that I can just get through all of the information. But this is an encouragement. This is an encouraging piece, right? Because I always talk about this has the greatest ability to transform, which is, therefore, this is 2 Corinthians 5, 17 through 21. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, He is a new creation. The old has gone and the new has come. So if you need a little bit of encouragement in your relationship, I want to kind of put here that if any marriage is in Christ, behold, it is a new creation. In your marriage or your relationship, the old is gone and the new has come. In some versions it says, behold, the new has come, I believe. And all of this is from God. God actually wants a newness in your marriage, your relationship, and ultimately in you. That's what happens when we forgive. We turn over a new leaf. We heal, right? And all this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ. Because here's the thing, we were essentially on bad terms, but he reconciled us back to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. So that ministry is not just for people you don't know or people in your community, but that ministry of reconciling that he gave you is even for your loved ones. It's even for your spouse. It's even for your kids. It's even for your family members, right? And so that God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting men's sins against them. Oh, that's a tall call, right? Because essentially when we're forgiving, we're saying, this happened. It hurt. It was a sin or what have you. It could be big or small. But what you're saying is, I'm not going to count that thing against you. And essentially, I'm going to follow this beautiful example that Christ has shared with me. Because at the end of the day, I'm forgiven too, essentially. And he has committed us to this message of reconciliation, right? And we therefore are Christ ambassadors. So now we're going out as ambassadors, doing the same everywhere that we go. Okay? Just wanted to encourage you there. And we are therefore Christ ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. Oh my gosh. Could God be making his appeal to your spouse through you? Could he be making his appeal to try to win them over through your unconditional love? My goodness, that could be so powerful. Be reconciled to God. God made him who has no sin to be sin for us. So sometimes my mom, she's like one of the sweetest people I know. She'll be like, Cassandra, they killed Jesus. She's like, no one's killed you. And I was like, you're right. And so here are just a few practical things, because we're all about the practical here as well. So Cassandra, so what does that mean? Like, how do you practically forgive? So in your relationship, especially if it's a marriage, remember what brought you together. Okay, so this is actually an acronym here I have for you. So R is to remember what brought you together. E is eradicate the need to get even. That's a part of that definition. That's going to help you be the best version of yourself. Get rid of that need to try to get even or cause them pain, family, right? And then C is connection, okay? Bridging the gap. Because a lot of times when someone has done something to hurt you, what happens is that can cause distance. You want to distance yourself from it because it's kind of painful. But if you can commit to connecting, and a very helpful way to connect is actually through positive things that you do together, fun things that you do together. And then you can start to associate that person with pleasure, which bonds you, which unites you, which brings you together, which helps you to become one. Right? And that's what we're looking for. We're looking to restore, bring it back together. And then oneness. Remembering you're on the same team. Like, you're a part of me. So if I'm actively doing something in retaliation to hurt you, I'm hurting myself. Because if you're hurt, especially in a marriage, because if you're hurt, I'm hurt too. it's going to affect me some kind of way. And then the N is negativity removal. Because negativity brings about a distance. Negativity brings about more negativity. It can cause, we want to get rid of that criticism, complaining, contempt, right? The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, when it comes to Dr. John Gottman's work, these were called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse because if you're not familiar with his research, he would invite newlywed couples into his research lab and he would analyze them, see how they were interacting to see, how they would fare long term. And he came up with these 4 horsemen because they were that predictive of divorce, right? They were that harmful. He would call them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse because these 4 things were very harmful to the bond. And he could predict up to 94% accuracy whether these couples will get divorced within 7 years. Okay, so this is real when it comes to negativity removal. So you want to remove criticism, attacking that person's. So that's not just attacking the issue, that's attacking them, and being critical. Contempt, mockery, mocking who they are, taking that contempt even further. Defensiveness, providing all those excuses, defending your behavior, counterattacks, one-upping them when they come in with their concerns. And then the last one is stonewalling, when there's that complete shutdown. That's that silent treatment. And none of that is helpful. It can be very, very problematic, family, to that bond and to the reconciliation process. So you want to remove all of that. Okay, so that negativity removal, that's the end. C, you want to consider your whomever it is, whether it's your spouse, parent, child, you want to actually consider their perspective because that's going to help you be more empathic. And here's the other piece about considering their perspective. Even though you may not agree, even though they may have done or said something that hurt you, when you see their perspective and you actually validate their emotions, oh my goodness. Emotion validation is so powerful. It actually helps the other person feel seen. It actually makes them feel like, oh my goodness, you understand. And that's a need, that's a desire in a relationship. And so when you do that, it is so extremely powerful, family. It is so extremely powerful. So when you kind of step outside of yourself and you consider their perspective, so powerful. And then intimacy, right? The last thing is, that's not the last thing. It's a few more things here in the acronym. Is intimacy, right? You want to be vulnerable again. Because unforgiveness, what that thing does is it can make you hard. It can harden you up. It can make you put that wall up. But when we're thinking about a relationship, we want to get through to the other person. We want to remove the barriers. We want to remove the walls. We want to remove those things so that we can connect, right? And so we want to be able to do that. We want to be vulnerable. Right? Because that connects you too. So Shasta Nelson, she did a TED Talk. I think she has a book on this as well, on friendimacy. And intimacy or being vulnerable is a part of connecting you to your friends. Not just your friends, I think your spouse, your kids, whomever. And she talks about how positive experiences mixed with vulnerability and consistency over time really bonds you. And sometimes that's what unforgiveness fractures. So when we can have that level of emotional intimacy, we can have that level of vulnerability, then that bonds you to someone. I talk to my students about this all the time in class. I always say, you want to get close to somebody? Share how you feel. Do self-disclosure. And when you self-disclose, like those more intimate parts of yourself, you feel closer to that person, right? I know I do. And it actually encourages them to self-disclose to you as well. So that's a really surefire, easy way to do that. And then the L is for letting go. With letting go, sometimes you got to let go, of course, of, just holding on to the negativity. But another part of it is letting go sometimes of your expectations. Sometimes after you've forgiven someone, you're like, okay, that means you better line up. You better do things right. I forgave you. Okay, you need to do A, B, C, D. Now, of course, I think it's really important to teach people how to love you. But at the end of the day, they're still going to be human, just like you are. And so letting go of those expectations actually gives room for grace. And who needs a little grace? I know I do. Because none of us are perfect. And so when you let go of those expectations, when there's a discrepancy between our expectations and what we're giving, we kind of act a certain way, and it may not be the best version of ourselves. So sometimes you got to let that thing go. And then lastly, you want to embrace. When you think about, if you have little kids, how sometimes you say, if you have multiple kids, you're like, okay, now I want you to apologize. Now I want you to go hug. Like there's something very powerful about a hug and an embrace, right? So now you want to embrace them again. You want to welcome them back in. Because I remember when you haven't forgiven, you're kind of pushing that person away. But you want to embrace them again, welcome them into your intimate space again. It can be extremely, extremely powerful. Okay? So I think I got to all the little pieces from that acronym, because here's another powerful piece about why you actually cannot afford unforgiveness. Why do I say that? The reason why you cannot afford unforgiveness is because of who it could morph you into and how it can change your mindset. Not just on that relationship. Sometimes this can transfer to other relationships as well. And you literally cannot afford to walk around in a constricted, distorted version of yourself. How does it distort you? It distorts you because it distorts your mindset, family. All right. And so it distorts your view of your spouse, of your friend. Now what is happening is you're starting to see that person through the lens of what they did. And that's it. Right. And so that distortion is going to cause you to show up differently with respect to how you engage with them. And you start to see them through a different set of lenses. And it's not a lens of grace. You're actually starting to see this person through the lens of fear as well as contempt. And when you are walking through kind of like a lens of contempt and fear, man, it's hard to engage with them in a positive way. All right. And it also keeps your mind wired to the past. And hardwired to the past. And it causes you to adopt some false beliefs. One, that this situation will never change, that they can never change. It actually can cause you to fantasize, because we don't like pain. It can cause you to fantasize about what it would be like if this relationship ended, right? It can also cause some selfish ambition too. Looking out for yourself, self-preservation, self-protection. And you can start to see that relationship as a consumer with respect to what is this doing for me, and that being the only lens that you see that relationship through. And that can be very unhelpful. All righty. So, this is probably going to have to be a two-part podcast, because I want to share with you, well, Cassandra, how do you rebuild trust? How do you rebuild trust? How do you move on? What are the things that the other person may be going through, right? Not the person who's just been offended, but the offender, per se. We're going to talk about it. And so, if so, I guess I'm going to have to go ahead and promise now to do a second part to this thing, because I think it'll be extremely helpful. But before we go, I want to talk to you about how it impacts your health. So, with your physical health, when you actually forgive, you actually sleep better, which is also influences your immune functioning. And it also kind of helps you think a little bit more clearly as well. These are some things that come from the Forgiveness Lab. And so also, you may say, okay, Cassandra, this is good. All right, you gave me the science. You gave me all of that. But how do I actually do these things? How do I actually forgive? It starts with a choice. And as I said before, it's just a choice. I'm going to forgive them. A conscious decision. I'm going to forgive this person for whatever they did. And then sometimes we're looking to the other person to heal the hurt, but sometimes they don't have the capacity to do that. So I think it's really important for you to partner with God because He created your heart. He created you. He knows you better than you know yourself. And so partner with Him for the healing process. And then secondly, see this other person as another person on their journey. See them as human who makes mistakes just like you. It's really kind of extending that grace. Another practical step, we actually already talked about it, was letting go of some of those expectations for them to line up and be perfect. And then you're going to have to put forward some action, whether that may be, talking to a counselor, whether that may be coping. Like if you're triggered, you have something that you can do, maybe exercise or what have you. Having maybe journaling, having a process whereby you can journal and cope with those strong emotions because they may come up. And it's okay because you are human, okay? And here are some last practical tips. Only focus on one situation at a time whenever you do need to talk to the person. One situation at a time. Don't bring up the last 10 things that they did that offended you because then they could get overwhelmed, and you can too, honestly. State the facts. Because here's the thing. This is what we want to do, family. We want to separate them from what they did. Okay? We want to state the facts. What happened? When it happened? How did it make you feel? And what do you want to see instead? Also too, I call this the stroke before you kick method. Speak to the good first before you have to bring up the offense, right? Positive reinforcement is powerful. So you may even speak to how they've done good with what you're discussing right now in the past, or some margin of good or progress that they've made in the area. But then you may have to give some feedback for growth, right? What happened? When it happened? How did it make you feel? Separate the behavior from the person. Separate that from their personhood. And that's going to help you to see them through a lens of grace instead of through a lens of contempt, okay? Also, repair well. I say, too, another thing that you may not think that is really helpful is actually to use humor. Now, I'm not talking about sarcastic humor. Actually, when you're in a healing reparative process, sarcasm can actually be very harmful. Because, sarcasm usually has a little bit of truth in there, and then they're taking that seriously. So sarcasm usually is not very helpful when you are in a repair process. But the way you can use humor is almost to pick at yourself a little bit. And, I'm always, doing something quirky. And then that kind of lightens the atmosphere. Remembering that you're on the same team as well. Okay, so those are my practical steps, because I guess I always like to have practical steps. I guess it's the teacher in me. So that's your homework, is to utilize one of those practical steps for your forgiveness journey. Also, too, if you think it would be very helpful, I think that you should not only know your love language, you also need to know your apology language, because apologies are very needed. And repairs are needed for the maintenance of anything good. Just like your car. It could be, something really fancy. But if you keep on driving it, it's going to need an alignment after a while. It's going to need an oil change. That's just a part of having a car. And the same is true for our relationships. Forgiveness is just a part of having a good, healthy relationship. It's a maintenance tool, family. And so that's what I want you to do. I want you to have that peace. And so I have a cute little part of our podcast, at the end, I actually will take a question from you. So you can always email me at info@upliftingrelationships.com to send me your questions, and I'm going to pull it from a fishbowl, and, I'll answer it, without even thinking about it. I'm just going to pull it out. So I won't have a lot of time to think about it, but it will be kind of fresh off my mind. So it'll be a true response. So you can feel free to send your questions there. Also, too, if you want to catch me at upliftingrelationships.com, you can do that as well. And did you know I'm having a whole conference for married couples on September 30th? Yeah, you want to be a part of that as well by going to upliftingconference.com. It's going to be absolutely amazing. We're going to be really focusing on how to connect to your spouse, connect to God, and connect to your mission, because there's a reason why you were brought together for marriage. So I can't wait. And I would be so honored to see you in person. And we're going to have like a beautiful ball where you can get you dressed up, and I mean, real nice, like prom attire, nice, cuter than prom attire, right? It's going to be absolutely wonderful. So you definitely want to join us for that. Alrighty, so I'm so excited about this part of our episode where we will take a question from you all, right? So if you have any questions, feel free to send them in to info@upliftingrelationships.com, and I'll answer it live while I'm actually taping, and it'll be a real true response. And so I'm really interested in seeing what you have to ask, because ultimately this is for you. I want this information to truly resonate and be helpful and help you uplift the most treasured relationships in your life, right? So I want to make sure I'm spot on. It's kind of like when I'm in class and I get to get questions from the students. It really tailors the content to you. And that's what I'm hoping this podcast will do. I want to really tailor it to your needs and your questions. All righty. Let's see what we have here. Okay. This is such a good one. It says, how do you move forward with childhood trauma? Oh, trauma is such a tricky thing, right? It has a way of, it's always, unexpected, undeserved, right? And it's traumatic. And here's the thing about childhood trauma. It's called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. So Kaiser Permanente, in conjunction with the CDC, they did a study called ACEs, trying to see how trauma impacts the health trajectory of children long term. And, there are 10 questions that you answer. The higher your ACE score, kind of, the more likelihood you may have, problems emotionally or, physically through your health long term. And so here is the thing about childhood trauma, is that sometimes we may not think that could be affecting us in adulthood, is that we have to actually be real and heal. Right? And actually recognize and actually see the traces. How is this impacting me? And a lot of times it impacts our attachment. So if there's been trauma, sometimes it can cause us to have maybe an anxious attachment style or an avoidant attachment style. And sometimes you may not necessarily be able to talk to that person physically. What if they're dead? I always say that forgiveness is still true even when it was a traumatic experience, because in that definition, it didn't say that you had to necessarily reconcile with that person, but it will still serve in that preservation process. So there is, I forgot the person who coined this, but let's just say the person you need to forgive is no longer living. Maybe it was a grandparent. Maybe it was a parent. I would say do the empty chair exercise. And in this empty chair exercise, what you're doing is you are pretending like you're talking to the other individual, right? And you express all of your emotions, how you felt about that. And then you get to sit in the empty chair like you are them, and you get to give yourself the response that you hope that they would have given you. And even though you didn't hear it from them, you heard it from yourself. Because it talks about the ability to move on. Because we do not want that childhood trauma to define us and define how we show up in loving relationships. And it's so unfortunate that these things happen, especially when you are most vulnerable during childhood. And so I would really recommend, one, that maybe you see a counselor who can help you process that to see, are there any residual effects of this trauma in my adulthood? Is this impacting how I'm trusting? Is this impacting how I engage with my kids? Is this impacting how I'm engaging with others who are my treasured relationships? And so getting that help and assistance, and then doing what you can to cope and deciding. And here's the thing, when there's been trauma, sometimes there'll be some triggering thoughts. Or triggering feelings. And so what you want to do is have a way of escape when those things happen. Know that I may need to go for a walk. I may need to go work out. I may need to do these things. Alrighty. So that's my encouragement to you. And I'm so sorry if any trauma has happened, but you can move forward, and it doesn't have to define you, family. Oh goodness, I love you and I mean it. I know that's a hard one. But thank you for that question, because that's a real question that maybe not is only applicable to you, but it's probably also applicable to so many other people. So you be encouraged. Thank you for asking. Well, on that note, family, thank you for joining us for the Uplifting Relationships podcast. Until our next episode, I guess I already promised you a part 2 to this thing. So be on the lookout for that. But other than that, thank you for joining me. And I pray that this information was uplifting and it will help you be the best version of yourself in your most treasured relationships. Love you, and I mean it. Take care.